after the revival of the Resident Evil brand with 2017's Resident Evil 7, which breathed new life into a franchise that desperately needed something new and innovative. And even 2019's return to the series' roots with the Resident Evil 2 remake, many fans were excited when Resident Evil 3 was announced to be the next game to be given a fresh, new makeover in the wonderful new RE engine, across both RE7 and the RE2 remake. But fans became uneasy when it was revealed the remake would be released just a short year after the launch of the RE2 remake, and further when it was announced to come bundled with a new online Resident Evil title, Resident Evil Resistance. While I personally feel the RE3 remake did accomplish what it set out to do, quite well I might add, it did fall short of what a remake of such a legendary game should be. So this is my review of why Resident Evil 3 Remake failed. Starting with the biggest offender, we have the titular man himself, Nemesis, who in the original would appear seemingly at random throughout the story, pursuing Jill. Here in the remake, however, he appears and essentially blows his proverbial load in the first 5 minutes of the game, smashing through Jill's apartment complex like the Kool-Aid Man on crack. And after Jill escapes him at the end of the tutorial section, he decides to basically piss off for a good chunk of the game, and considering how small the game actually is, that is quite a feat. On the first playthrough, the Nemesis encounters can be exciting, since you don't really know what to expect, but on subsequent runs can be just tedious as you just try to get through the section into the new area. Speaking of, you only have 3 proper Nemi chase scenes before he becomes essentially just a periodic bullet dump boss fight. The first one isn't too bad as he chases you around a rooftop with a flamethrower, but the next 2 boss fights are just laziness incarnate. The fight for this consists of 2 phases, one where he attacks you on the ground and then a second phase where he runs around the area and attempts to jump at you, but you can stun him when he gets ready to jump and pump him full of damage. And yes, they do this for 2 boss fights, except in the second one there's zombies that will spawn in Nemi's second phase. This brings us to the final fight, where on the assisted and normal difficulties is an absolute joke to get through, but on Nightmare and Inferno it becomes basically a Dark Souls boss, where even if you have all the stat buffs, he will still just flinch lock you with each hit taking most of your health. It's very cheap, making it unnecessarily frustrating to fight that final boss. That leaves a bitter taste in your mouth at the very end of the game. Moving on from the dead horse as Nemesis, we should talk about the game's length. Or rather, the lack thereof. While Resident Evil games aren't particularly known for their length, they usually provide an 8 to 10 hour long story. However, even with taking a very slow approach, reading everything and backtracking for every item, you'll still finish the game in just a few hours. And when you know the game well enough, you can even finish it in under an hour without glitches of any kind. The biggest reason for this comes down to the cut content and overall reduced sections of the game. While I don't particularly care much for the loss of the park, the clock tower, which they were heavily hinting at through the game, with one of the only few puzzles in the game, brochures, and even the second Nemi fight happening right in front of and ending with Jill walking towards it, never appears in the game, which is downright insulting when they hinted at it so heavily. Not even in a PTSD Jill dream sequence, which they use in the game already, which would have made so much sense explaining away the spiders, and there's to say nothing of the areas we did get, which were all condensed to hell. Starting with Raccoon City, in the original it actually felt as if you were traversing a city proper, with many routes and options you could take along the way. Here, however, it's been streamlined into an entirely linear zone, with backtracking for items here and there. It is a Resident Evil game, but the only short divulging path here basically tells you you can go to the restaurant or you could take this alleyway. And it all leads to getting the fire hose, and while you spend a good deal of time here, there's really nothing to do with the explorable areas, and it is deceptively small. If you thought Raccoon City was too short, the sewer section is going to need you to hold its trash. Because, my god, is it painfully slow. That even on a non-speed run, you'll only ever spend a few minutes down here as you get the nade launcher and insta-kill everything down here. While we're on the topic of the sewer section, though, this brings up the game's biggest flaw, its pacing. What do I mean by this? Well, when writing a story, how fast events happen or scenes change, if something goes by too fast or drags on too long, like this video, for example, the pacing and overall story suffers. This matters because at one moment you're in the sewers and the very next you're scaling a skyscraper that's under construction, with very little idea of what's going on because the game never bothers to let you catch your breath here. And while that tactic works well with action movies, it doesn't translate that well to survival horror. Then again, in all fairness, this game has one explosion or rear shot of Jill from getting Michael Bay's lawyers involved. This problem gets worse when right after the boss fight on top of the building ends, you're put right back at street level and basically just into another linear section featuring Rocket Nemi until you get back to Carlos. Besides showing Nemi's tenacity, this section here only serves to cameo Kendo in the RPD, which actually brings me to my next point, Best Boy Carlos himself. Carlos's section in the game is incredibly short, broken into two parts, the RPD and the hospital. Starting with the RPD, it's a small area of the zone you play as in RE2 Remake, which sees you make a beeline for the STARS office, doing a very basic puzzle to get the battery for the explosive device on the second floor. Fun fact, this is actually the reason the wall is already broken open in the RE2 remake. We also get to see Brad is the one who actually infected Marvin, so some points there for continuity. After blowing open the wall, you have a small horde moment and a liquor. But that's basically it for the RPD as you immediately go into the STARS office. As for the hospital, beyond being shorter than I feel it should have been, my only issue here is the RE4 cabin fight being put back into yet another zombie game. Look, we get it, Capcom. Resident Evil 4 was a great game and all, but we really don't need the cabin fight to cameo in every shooter or zombie game until the heat death of the universe. In spite of it being a played out scenario, it feels especially fun in this game, as it gives you just about everything you could want to fend off an entire zombie horde by yourself. The fight here is an absolute power trip, and it absolutely makes you feel like a superhero, gunning down an entire horde. And on my first playthrough, I absolutely loved this. After fulfilling your power fantasy with Carlos, you're back as Jill. And here's where the hospital's rank really hurts. After you wake up, you can make a beeline right for the Umbrella Lab, and unless you really want the Magnum, or the Regenerator's albino cousins, or whatever they're called in this game, or just a few extra bullets, Jill has no real reason to explore the hospital since the lab entrance can be opened with the lockpick and it's in the very first room past Tyrell. What they could have done here is put the small Jill puzzle here and put it on the door, and have Jill search the hospital for a key that would open the door, and then she could go into the lab, and that would actually give her a reason to explore the hospital, but there's just no real incentive there in the main game. As far as the labs are concerned, they consist of just a few rooms and can be easily run through in less than about 10 minutes or so. There's really not a whole lot going on here, and as the endgame area, it's pretty disappointing since you would expect this is where the real challenge would be. And unless it's Nightmare or Inferno mode, that challenge just never comes. Resident Evil 3 Remake is a game that on the surface fans wanted to be a classic survival horror game, and live up to the legendary status of the original. But at its core, RE3 Remake is a casual Michael Bay-esque power trip that is exactly the reason why the RE3 Remake failed. And I think that's okay. Now, now hold on, put down your pitchforks. Let me explain myself. From the beginning, the biggest obstacle facing this game had absolutely nothing to do with the game itself. When everyone saw the trailer for it, they thought it'd be like the RE2 remake. But RE3 never tries to be that. From start to finish, RE3 is a casual, short ride that doesn't let you go, and while I admit the losing content sucks, the game still has plenty of replayability to unlock everything. This wasn't meant for us in the older, more seasoned RE vet crowd. This is a game whose purpose was to bring in new players who may not be familiar with RE, and in everything they tried to include, minus the second and third enemy fights because they suck and they're copy pasted. You can tell everyone who worked on this put their heart and soul into this project. And for those who want a challenge, Village looks like it's going to be a return to RE7's roots with a fresh new take. So having one game that can help expand the fanbase, is that really so bad? And just because a game fails, that doesn't mean it wasn't a good game. That's why I wanted this to be the first game I review on the channel. To set the tone of my style of review and let you all know it's okay if a game has flaws. So, for my official rating, I give RE3 Remake a 7 out of 10. Losing points for cut content and short length, but still making a solid game overall. While it may seem as if I were bashing the game at points, I genuinely enjoyed this game, being several run-throughs myself, unlocking nearly everything along the way. I'm hard on this game in my review because I care. Critiquing games is how developers know what works and what doesn't. I want everyone to know it's okay to point out flaws in anything, so long as it's not from a place of toxicity. Anyway, I wanted to thank every one of you that watched this video. I appreciate it so much. And if you like the video, why not like and subscribe? And if you want to see a review for a specific game in the future, feel free to comment it down below. This has been Halex, signing out.